At ground level, dense scrub and tall grasses project the image of an untouched natural environment, pressing against the geometric edges of human development. We test the accuracy of that image by reading the landscape's ecological history through the Riverside Park Botanical Survey. To gauge the potential of this land, we rely on the network index, scoring the relative presence of different flowering plants across the site. This table shows the habitat analysis for the park, ranking 15 habitat types by their network index. The top row, cultivated and disturbed land, registers a high network index of 205. Compare that to broadleaved woodland at 199. Disturbed soil plants outrank primary woodland flora. This score reflects how the site's history and its current perimeter still shape the botanical profile. By deconstructing this table row by row, we isolate the specific factors driving the local ecology. This data will map how historical land use, structural biology, and the physical geography of the valley floor interact. Evaluating Riverside Park's restoration potential requires treating the site as a recovering anthropogenic artifact rather than a pristine wilderness. We start by isolating the data points that measure direct human influence on the park's flora. Pulling the indices for cultivated and disturbed land, built-up areas, and roadside verges out of the main grid reveals a distinct anthropogenic cluster. The 205 index for disturbed land is a botanical artifact of historical farming practices that occurred on this site. Conversely, the indices of 44 for built-up areas and 10 for verges measure modern effects driven by housing along the park's western flank. This proximity introduces garden escapes, non-native plant species that cross the boundary from suburban gardens into the park's network. One major species contributing to the disturbed land index is the three-cornered leek. It is quickly joined by a second invasive species, the winter heliotrope. These species colonize the disturbed soils left behind by historical use, shifting the botanical profile toward non-native dominance. There is another remnant of human-managed landscapes in the data, the index of 65 for parkland and scattered trees. Unlike the invasive plants, this historical parkland topology creates an open habitat that provides cover for various bird species. The anthropogenic footprint is a persistent factor dictating the current botanical baseline of the park. Set against these stressors is the network's natural defensive counterbalance. Grouping broadleafed woodland, scrub, and hedgerow scrub maps the park's canopy and corridor system. Human bias often interprets thick, scrubby hedgerows as merely untidy. But when grouped, the scrub and hedgerow indices produce a combined score of 265, outranking the disturbed land metric. This 265 metric represents the essential structural scaffolding of the entire park network. The broadleaved woodlands supply the thermal regulation and physical cover that local mammal populations require. Simultaneously, the continuous lines of hedgerow scrub operate as transit corridors for birds and insects moving through the valley floor. When we compare this structural engine against the anthropogenic footprint, the ecological dynamic becomes clear. A high prevalence of native scrub serves as a biological defense, physically limiting the spread of garden escapes. The structure of this scrubby landscape provides the physical conditions that support native bird and insect populations. Both the invasive footprint and the structural defenses are governed by the physical geography of the valley floor. High numbers for damp and neutral flora are foundational signatures of this river valley topology. The final grouping consists of wet grassland, neutral grassland, water margin, and standing water. This cross-section maps these plant indices to the moisture gradient created by the river. Standing water at 17, wet and neutral grasslands at 128 and 83, and the water margin at 70. The standing water index of 17 is driven by damp woodland ponds, not the main river. Within the grasslands, the calcareous index of 48 indicates localized patches of alkaline soil. Meanwhile, the dry shrub heath index of 34 points to isolated patches of acidic soil. These indices reveal a patchwork of localized, varied microsoils existing within the broader damp valley floor. These microvariations expand the range of ecological niches available across the network. The physical geography establishes the rules, dictated by water and soil chemistry, that determine where both invasive and native plants can survive. Stepping back from these isolated metrics lets us view the park's botanical profile in its totality. The data categorizes into three overlapping forces: historical/disturbed soil, structural scrub/woodland, and geographic grass/water. Translated into a spatial map, the park emerges as a mosaic of these competing forces fighting for territory. The data shows species associated with disturbed land and brownfield sites remain a dominant presence here. That presence is balanced by the established primary habitats of woodland, scrub, and freshwater margins. For those assessing this site, the data yields a specific management takeaway. Ecological restoration here does not require starting from a blank slate or re-engineering the soil. The strategy is to leverage the combined 265 index of the scrub and woodland base. Active management helps these structural native plants outcompete historical invasives, moving in from the western flank. While the ghosts of past land use still shape the botanical index, the park's robust structural scaffolding provides a viable engine for long-term ecological recovery.